What happens when a woman saves a man whom everyone considered an enemy? You won't believe how this simple act of kindness turned her whole life upside down and brought the house to a standstill at dawn. First, there was the smell of smoke. Warm, acrid, homely, the kind of smell you get in old houses with stoves and cracked walls. Clara woke up to the smell and wasn't surprised. It had been her alarm clock for many years. The stove crackled like an old man with rheumatism, and Clara, throwing on a warm sweater, got up without making a sound. Her father was asleep, or rather he was lying there. He hadn't gotten up since the fall. At first he said he was just tired. Then he said his legs wouldn't work, and then he stopped talking altogether. Now he just lay there. Like old furniture. It's there, but it's useless. Clara made some flatbread. She had some dough left over from yesterday. She quickly grabbed it and placed it on the stone, and the air filled with the smell of corn, ash, and something else, like childhood, only spoiled by time. She put the flatbread on a rag, went over to her father, placed a cup of broth next to him, and said quietly, "It's hot. Eat while it's still warm." He didn't answer. As always, he didn't even turn his head. Clara sighed, not because she was tired. Tiredness had long since become second nature to her. It was just that when a person does good every day, and every day is met with silence, one day they start to listen to that silence. It makes more sense than words. She went out into the yard. The frost crunched under her feet. The air cut her cheeks. A bucket stood by the well, frozen solid. She tapped it with her heel, and the ice cracked. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the wheels of a cart creaked. Clara sat down on a log and pulled on her mittens. Smoke was coming out of the chimney. The house was breathing, but inside, there was no one. As a child, she thought that family was when someone was waiting for you. Now she knew that family was when you waited to be humiliated again, and then went to cook soup. Returning to the house, she saw that the flatbread was untouched. Her father was lying with his back to the wall. "It'll cool down," she said quietly. He didn't answer. Then, after a minute, he muttered hoarsely, "You'd be better off dead than living here in this shit." Clara froze. She wasn't expecting thanks. But words like that, especially in the morning, especially from him, hit her like a slap in the face. Don't even dream about it. "Enjoy your breakfast," she said. Her voice didn't waver. Inside, though, everything was shaking. Not from hurt, from repetition. Because it's one thing when you're hit for the first time. It's completely different when you know in advance exactly what they're going to say, when they're going to say it, and with what intonation. She cleared the cup away and wiped the crumbs off the table with a cloth. She put a pot on the stove and began to chop cabbage. Monotonously, carefully. The knife cut as if it were cutting memories, not vegetables. A faded photograph hung on the wall. Her father was in uniform, her mother was wearing a white blouse, and she was a child with ribbons in her hair. They were smiling. The photograph was old and worn, as if life itself had been erased from it. It was funny. The photo showed a family, and now there were only two left, and one of them was silent. There was a knock on the window. She turned around. Daniel, the neighbor's son, was standing there with a bag of firewood. It wasn't the first time he had brought some. He entered silently, put down the bag, and nodded. He said, "It's freezing. It'll be worse in the evening." "Thank you," Clara replied briefly. He looked at her. In a human way, as if he knew she was hanging on by a thread. Then he left. When the door closed behind him, her father said hoarsely, "He's no good for you. His hands are like a horse's." Clara didn't answer. She just put the kettle on for tea. The answer was already burning on her tongue. But what was the point? She already knew that when you answered, it was worse. Better to let the words burn inside. There were already plenty of them there. and then she sat down. She just sat down by the stove and stared at the fire. And she thought, if only someone could see her now. The way she was holding her back, the way she was silent, the way she wasn't crying. Maybe they would understand. But no one would see her. She was alone, and she knew it. And it wasn't pity. It was all she had left. What happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. It was still dark when Clara heard her father coughing. Those sounds had long since become something like church bells to her. Inevitable, rusty, strained. She didn't jump up at the first wheeze, just lay there, listening to the gasps turn into coughs, knowing that life in the house was hanging by a thread. The silence around her seemed especially loud, as if she herself were hammering nails into the wall, hanging the weight of expectation and inevitability. Clara glanced at the old clock on the wall. The glass was dusty, the hands had long since stopped, but it didn't matter. Time had long since lost its meaning here. She remembered how, as a child, the ticking of the clock had created a feeling of comfort, but now it was a silent witness to family quarrels and unspoken grievances. Next to the clock lay an old photograph, a young mother with her children, their faces bright and full of hope, long since erased by life and fatigue. In the kitchen, where corn tortillas had been baking yesterday, the air was filled with cold and the smell of dampness. Clara felt the cold seeping into her bones, as if her family had grown as cold toward her as this house. A phrase her sister had once uttered with icy derision came to mind. "You've always been too soft. That's why they walk all over you." The words now sounded louder than her sister's voice, as if they were nails hammered into her heart. She understood that this softness was both her curse and her only protection, softness that was not accepted, not heard, and not understood. Her heart ached at the realization that her family did not want to change their established roles, was not ready to see the truth, and that cruelty had long since become the rule of the game. Doubts grew inside her, burning like flames. Was it still possible to believe in love if it always came with pain? Clara mentally replayed the days when her kindness was met with coldness and indifference. Each memory was like a small nail in the wall of her soul, sharp, painful, but familiar. And yet, deep inside, like a quiet voice in an empty house, there was hope. Hope that one day the chain of pain could be broken, that gentleness would cease to be weakness and become strength. At that early hour, while the house was still asleep, Clara allowed herself one thing, to acknowledge both her weakness and her strength. Her eyes darted to the window, where the first rays of dawn timidly broke through the clouds, promising a new day. A day that could be the beginning of change. We have only just begun this story, but it will become even more painful and true. Stay to see what a person who has been rejected by their own can do. The morning in Clara's house began not with hope, but with the familiar heavy silence that filled every corner and every breath. In the kitchen, where flatbread had recently been baked, there was a faint smell of damp wood and spilled milk. On the table was a cup with the remains of yesterday's broth and a neatly folded rag, which seemed to be the only thread of order in this chaos. Clara walked through the house with the precision of a machine, step by step, bypassing the mess that was a reflection of her inner state. Her gaze slid around the corners. Children's toys, long forgotten and scattered about, old clothes lying in a pile, and broken things that no one dared to repair. Each item seemed like a piece of an unsolvable puzzle into which her life had been drawn. Her family was nearby, but it was as if they were behind a wall of misunderstanding. Her sister, with whom she had once shared her childhood, now spoke in an even, almost cold voice. Her father remained as silent as ever, but his eyes were empty and heavy. Her mother walked around the house with a weight on her shoulders, as if hiding her true feelings from everyone, which could only be read in her rare sighs. The family was not ruled by love, but by habit, the habit of surviving with each other, closing their eyes to what hurt. The conversations were short, gliding past the real issues like ice on the surface of a lake, beneath which lay the depths of pain and alienation. Clara wanted to find understanding, but all she got were cold words and accusations that fell like stones on her soul. On that day, she tried to hold back the urge to scream, to break the silence for just a moment. Her thoughts were intertwined with memories of what home could have been if love had been more than just a word, but an action. But now, reality seemed harsh and unyielding, like the old walls that constantly reminded her of the past. And deep down, Clara knew that in order to survive, she had to make a choice. Either continue to suffer and live in the shadow of her own family, or find the strength to change everything. This choice hung in the air like a harbinger of the storm that was already gathering over her life. We have reached a turning point. What happens next will change everything. You cannot miss the ending of this story. The day began as usual, but something in the air was different, heavy and tense, like before a storm. Clara opened the door, and a stranger was standing on the threshold. His face was covered with fatigue and a secret he had no intention of revealing right away. In his hands, he held a bundle covered in dust from the road, a sign that his appearance was no accident. The house seemed to freeze. Every sound seemed louder, and the silence deeper. Her family looked at the guest with suspicion and coldness. Clara felt something new stirring inside her, a mixture of fear, hope, and inevitability. The appearance of a stranger from outside stirred the stagnant waters, touching the depths of long-frozen relationships. This visit disrupted the usual course of events. An external conflict instantly erupted, exposing hidden wounds and unresolved grievances. Clara felt that a new, unfamiliar plot was unfolding outside the walls of her home, one that would force everyone to choose sides. The internal tension grew like an approaching storm. She understood that there was no choice left. She had to either face it and accept the challenge or remain forever a prisoner of the past that was killing her from within. At that moment, her heart was beating faster, and her thoughts were confused, as if trying to find a way out of a maze. Home was no longer just a home. It had become an arena of change that was inevitably creeping up on her, threatening to destroy everything she knew and cherished. And in this darkness, Clara realized for the first time that what was beginning now would change her life forever. This was the culmination. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay to see how the hero puts everyone in their place. A storm raged inside Clara. She stood at a crossroads where the past and the future collided in a violent dance of doubt and fear. To stay in the familiar pain meant submitting once again to the system that had destroyed her day after day. To risk change meant stepping out onto an open battlefield where there were no guarantees and no support. Her thoughts were tangled like a ball of yarn in her hands. She knew that the truth could break families and hearts, but the silence weighed heavier. An inner voice whispered, "If I speak, everything will collapse." But to remain silent meant to die slowly, to dissolve into the shadows of those who did not want to see her. Her family didn't understand, didn't want to understand. Their eyes were closed to change, to new meanings. Everything was held together by outdated rules that seemed sacred and inviolable. Clara realized with bitter irony how absurd the situation was, how painful it is when those you love become your worst enemies. Sarcasm and bitterness intertwined in her thoughts, creating an invisible shield. She understood that this was not just an argument, it was a battle for her own dignity, for the right to be herself, for the opportunity to breathe freely. And even if there was coldness and misunderstanding all around her, Clara was ready to take a step forward. With every passing minute, the internal conflict grew more intense. She could no longer remain on the sidelines because the price was too high, the price of her own life, her own soul. We have only just begun this journey. Everything that happens next will reveal new wounds and, perhaps, new paths. Don't miss it. The story is just gathering momentum. Clara finally made up her mind. She overcame her fear, doubts, and habits, opening the door behind which the truth was hidden. Like the first breath after a long hold, this decision marked a new stage. Not easy, not joyful, but necessary. Her words sounded like a hammer striking glass, clear, firm, and without hope for softness. The house where she grew up echoed with discontent and alienation. Her family did not accept her call for justice. On the contrary, they intensified their demands, as if trying to break her spirit. Clara felt the walls that had seemed impenetrable crack at the seams. But along with this feeling of destruction came the realization that she could no longer back down. This was her battle, and she was going into it alone, without support and with doubts, but with firm determination. Inside, she felt both lonely and rebellious. She knew that the whole house was now against her, that no one would lend her a helping hand. But she couldn't look back, only forward, even if there was nothing but emptiness and darkness ahead. That step changed everything. It was the beginning of her journey to freedom and to the pain she must endure to break free from the shackles of the past. The story enters a new phase. Everything is just beginning, and the most difficult trials lie ahead. Stay tuned to see how the heroine will face the inevitable. At the darkest moment, when it seemed that everything was falling apart, Clara unexpectedly felt support. Not from those she expected, but from someone who had been there all along but remained in the shadows. Her younger brother, quiet and observant. He didn't say much, but his glances and small gestures became a breath of fresh air for her in the stuffy room. In these rare moments, a living truth emerged between them, simple, without pathos or accusations. For the first time in a long time, Clara saw herself from the outside, through his eyes, vulnerable but strong. These brief encounters filled her heart with warmth and gave her the strength not to give up. They were like a light in the window, beckoning in the endless night. Thanks to this quiet presence, Clara began to see possibilities instead of obstacles. This line of support became a real lifeline for her, a place where she could be herself without masks or fear of rejection. And although there were many trials ahead, with this new ally, Clara felt that the path had become a little easier. The story is gaining depth. Stay tuned to see how small lights of hope can change even the darkest path. The first days in a new place were like a breath of fresh air after a long winter. Clara rented a small room in an old house on the outskirts, where the walls held the smells of other people's lives and long-forgotten stories. There were no reproaches or cold stares, only silence that could be filled with her thoughts. She began to speak aloud what she had previously kept inside, releasing years of pain and resentment. With each word, even if it was broken and painful, Clara felt her heart grow lighter. Her neighbor, an elderly woman with kind eyes, once simply placed a cup of tea next to her without asking for an explanation. It meant more than words could say. The meetings with her younger brother continued, and trust grew between them. They learned to listen to each other, and this gave Clara strength. Sometimes it seemed that life was starting to get better, and even the darkest shadows of the past faded in the light of new relationships. But behind every such moment there was still anxiety. Would this shaky support turn out to be just another illusion? Deep down, Clara knew that there were many trials ahead, and not all of them could be overcome without pain. The story moves forward, with hope and anxiety intertwined at every step. Don't miss the next stage. Everything will change again. Suddenly, the past burst into Clara's life with such force that everything she had built was threatened. In a house where everything seemed to have been frozen in time, A secret that had been hidden behind long years of silence and unspoken words came to light. The truth hit hard and fast, like a cold knife. Clara was forced to look straight into the eyes of what she had always been afraid to admit. This moment became a turning point, a point of no return. Emotions that had been suppressed for many years burst out, forcing her to rethink everything she knew about her family and herself. The sudden change of events raised a wave of tension that left everyone frozen on the edge of a new reality. Clara felt that the delicate balance was about to be broken, and no one would be the same. This was the emotional peak of the first half of the story, the moment when illusions were shattered and a new, harsh world of truth and struggle opened up before the heroine. The story had reached an important point. Watch closely. Now everything will go full throttle, and the heroine will find herself on the brink. After the secret came to light, the pressure from all sides became unbearable. Relatives who had previously remained silent or hidden behind words now openly attacked her. Every glance, every word was like a blow. Clara felt the fragile balance she had tried to build crumbling. Society, though silent, was also putting pressure on her. Neighbors whispered behind her back, and some openly showed their disapproval. Clara felt like she was in a cage where the walls were closing in on her with every passing minute, and there was no way out. Even the few supports that kept her spirit alive were beginning to crumble. Despair grew inside Clara. Breakdowns, tears, and screams became part of her daily life. She felt anger and pain filling her, poisoning every breath she took. Family grievances, old and new, became entangled in a knot that was increasingly difficult to untangle. But despite this, a spark of resistance lived deep within her. Clara understood that if she broke down now, everything would be lost. And it was this realization that gave her the strength to hold on and fight, no matter what. The situation is reaching a boiling point. The story enters a very difficult phase. Stay tuned to see how the heroine fights the approaching darkness. Clara found herself alone, truly alone, without her usual support and without hope. The house that once seemed like a trap to her had now turned into a lifeless void, where there was nothing left to sustain her spirit. Her posture became hunched, her voice quiet, and her gaze dull. It seemed as if the whole world around her had lost its color, and only coldness remained. At that moment, she was holding a photograph in her hands, an old, faded image capturing happy times long gone. But now it was torn in half, just like her hopes. It was symbolic, as if Clara's life itself had split into two parts, the one that had been and the one that would never be. In a fit of despair, she broke everything she had built over the past few months. A cup shattered, a glass candlestick fell and scattered into pieces, as if reflecting her inner chaos and destruction. Every sound was like a blow to her soul, every shard a reminder of how fragile her support had been. The pain that filled her seemed bottomless. No words of comfort, no hint of understanding came from outside. Only cold and emptiness. Clara felt that she had reached rock bottom and now had nowhere to fall. But even in this darkness, something flashed, a faint glimmer of inner strength that she had not yet realized. It was as if life itself was whispering to her, "This is not the end. You must find a way forward even if you cannot see the light right now." The story reaches its lowest point. Keep watching. The most important discoveries and decisions lie ahead. In the silence of the night, Clara was left alone with herself. No people, no words, only thoughts that churned like a storm inside her. She asked herself questions she couldn't escape: who she had become, what she really wanted, and whether the truth was on her side. These thoughts were cruel and merciless, forcing her to dig deep into the past, where old wounds and forgotten grievances lay hidden. Scenes from her childhood came to mind. Moments when love seemed as unattainable as the stars in the night sky. Her parents' voices now sounded like an echo that still made her heart pound. She remembered how she had thought then that everything would change, but reality had turned out to be harsher and tougher. In this internal dialogue between pain and realization, the first sincere insight was born, without pathos or loud words, but deep and quiet. Clara realized that her life was not just a chain of suffering, but an opportunity to choose. She was not just a victim of circumstances, but a person capable of changing her path. This moment became a turning point within her, a quiet but solid foundation for change. No rush, no illusions, just an honest look at herself and the world around her. She felt that she was now able to move forward, despite her fear and pain. The story is approaching an important turning point. Don't miss the next chapter. This is where the hero's true rebirth begins. Clara rose from her knees as if awakening from a long winter hibernation. She was no longer a prisoner of the past, no longer allowing pain to control her. The realization that her salvation depended only on herself gave her incredible strength, quiet but unyielding. It was a moment of choice, to become the one who would be saved, or the one who would save herself. She looked at her family differently, no longer as enemies, but as people blinded by their pain and fears. This realization did not bring forgiveness at first glance, but it was the beginning of the path to freedom. Clara knew that in order to be free, she had to go through herself, through the chaos of emotions that had accumulated over the years. Her actions became more decisive. She didn't wait for someone else to take the first step. With her words and deeds, she built a new reality in which there was no place for false hopes and betrayal. Her inner choice turned into movement, and movement turned into strength. Even if her family wasn't ready yet, even if the past held them back, Clara kept moving forward. Her heart was filled not with fear, but with determination, and this was the beginning of a new chapter in her life. We're moving towards the end of the story. Don't miss how the heroine faces her most important moment. Clara gathered her strength and decided to say what she had kept inside for so many years. Her voice was firm, but it sounded both wounded and hopeful at the same time. The house, where accusations and silence had been heard so many times, finally heard the truth, without embellishment or excuses. These words seemed to awaken those who had long lived in their own fears and delusions. Some lowered their eyes, some couldn't believe it, and some saw Clara for the first time not as an enemy, but as a person who had suffered and struggled. This moment became the point where everything could change. There was room for forgiveness, not as a way to forget the pain, but as a way to be free from it. Clara wasn't looking for complete understanding or approval. It was important to her that she was finally heard. And even though not all doors opened, she felt that a step had been taken. This scene had a goodbye, a hug, and silent acceptance. The ending was not perfect, but it was real, just like life. Clara made a choice that would not bring back her past, but would give her a chance for the future. The story is coming to an end. The final chapter will show how everything has changed in the heroine's life. Stay with us. Clara found herself back in that same kitchen, now bright and filled with new life. Everything was familiar but different, like after a long storm when the world seems renewed. She sat at the table alone, but there was no longer any fatigue or pain in her eyes. Instead of fear, there was peace and dignity. In her hands, she held the letter, the very one that had once caused a storm in the house, but now lay before her without a trace of anxiety. This envelope had become a symbol of the path she had traveled, the lessons she had learned, and the choices she had made. Now the letter no longer frightened her, but reminded her of the strength she had gained. The silence around her was not empty, but filled with meaning. In this calmness, Clara realized that life goes on, and she is ready to move forward without looking back. Her story is not about the past, but about how important it is to find the strength to live no matter what. The ending was quiet, but powerful, like the first breath of freedom after a long silence. Write in the comments what you would do in her place. Have you ever made decisions that changed your life forever? Share your story